Speaker, members of the House, very shortly, the United States Congress is likely to consider 3 ill-conceived and ill-timed trade agreements that will do nothing to create jobs in this country. One of these agreements is with the nation of Colombia. One of our most important responsibilities as elected officials is to promote and protect American jobs and American values. We do this by ensuring that those who receive trade preferences respect essential democratic rights. These are important rights: the rights to speak out and protest, the rights to organize unions and bargain collectively, and the rights of citizens to support political efforts to improve their economic condition without reprisals. Unfortunately, we see what happens when union members in Colombia try to exercise their rights. Death squads are unleashed against union activists and union rights leaders and defenders. Union leaders are gunned down in broad daylight. This isn't yesterday's news. The intimidation and violence continue this day. There have been 17 confirmed killings of unionists in Colombia this year, according to a human rights group. Last year, 90 unionists were murdered worldwide, 49 of them in Colombia. Colombia unionists face the highest rates of murder anywhere in the world. To overcome long-standing objections to passage of the Colombia Free Trade Agreement, President Santos of Colombia and President Obama signed a labor action plan on April 7th. The plan includes the deadlines for new laws that could enable workers to form unions as a means to advance social progress in Colombia. This plan has deadlines to restrict the use of cooperatives that allow employers to evade bargaining directly with their workers. It calls for new labor enforcement agencies and the hiring of additional inspectors. On the one hand, the Labor Action Plan has important elements that are necessary and valuable, and President Santos is to be commended for advancing this initiative. However, there are major gaps in the action plan. There are no benchmarks to show whether or not the new laws are on paper have been translated into laws on the ground. Will workers have greater ability to exercise their rights, to organize, to bargain collectively, and to negotiate contracts directly with employers? Will levels of violence and murder against trade unions be substantially reduced? Will employers and companies that violate the rights of workers be punished as prescribed under the new law? We don't know if these are merely gains on paper or whether they are real. And based upon the accelerated schedule, it appears that we won't be given a chance to learn if there will be real change on the ground before we consider the trade agreement with Colombia. Any trade agreement with Colombia must produce a verifiable reduction in the violence. It must protect human rights. It must end the impunity enjoyed by death squads and paramilitaries. Due to the lack of the benchmarks for progress, Colombia could still have a record year of assassinations, and the action plan would be declared a success. Under the plan, the Colombian government is supposed to be providing expanded physical protections for union activists. I met with regional and national union leaders last month who told me that little has changed on the ground. They told me they haven't received the protection. The action plan calls for hiring additional labor inspectors over the next 4 years to enforce these new laws. There is a program to relocate teachers who have received death threats. There is a program to address the backlog of thousands of union homicide cases that have yet to be prosecuted. And there is no assurance that the actions will be carried out. Last week, the Ways and Means Republicans opposed efforts to require Colombia to meet its obligations under the action plan as of the date of the free trade agreement goes into force. Without this provision, the U.S. has no leverage to assure implementation of the labor action plan. Maybe that is what the multinational corporations pushing this deal want. And since the agreement is being brought to the floor under fast track, Congress will not be able to consider amendments to make the action plan enforceable. Given this predicament, the least the administration can do is to stand behind its own action plan. The implementing legislation should require Colombia to fully comply with the plan before the agreement takes effect. The administration should confirm that compliance is on the ground through on-the-ground consultations with labor and human rights organizations. Without real change on the ground, this trade agreement is not fair to Colombian workers. They deserve the basic rights not to be subjected to threats and murder, and because they demand a better life. This agreement does not fairly represent our nation's values, and it's fundamentally unfair to America's workers. They can't compete with workers who face death squads for wanting a better working conditions. They can't compete with a country that continues to allow thousands of assassins to operate with impunity. It's past time that we as a nation stand up for American values and American workers. I yield back.